Ladies and gentlemen, we'll start the meeting, and we are so privileged and honored that the lecturer today is Shaunaka ji, who's known to everybody, and it's going to be a very interesting talk on conversion in Hindu culture. So, whether it's conversion from Hinduism, from a Hindu to something else, or conversion into Hinduism from outside, somebody becoming Hindu, we'll soon find out. And I'm sure it will lead to a very interesting question and answer session. Welcome to Shaunaka ji.
So here's the abstract, here's the blurb that we sent out. The word conversion conjures up images of determined zealots waving their book and haranguing a fallen soul to turn to the one true God. The issue of conversion in India has resulted in death and the destruction of sacred places. Some Hindus stand firmly by the assertion that there is no conversion in Hindu tradition. Some say that you become a Hindu only by birth, and others maintain that the impure should not even be allowed into temples. In this talk, we will explore Hindu ways of thinking about conversion, change, and transformation, and try to explain different approaches to these ideas and how they apply in a modern context. So I suppose, in short, what we're not discussing is Christians converting Hindus or Muslims converting Hindus. We're discussing what Hindus think about Hindu ideas of conversion. So a lot of the discussion is about these other things. And I just think it's important for us to reflect, do Hindus have an idea of conversion? Because if we do, then the whole discussion about Muslims converting Hindus and Christians converting Hindus becomes different. And I think it needs to be informed a little bit more. So it's often said that you can't convert to Hinduism. Who agrees with that? Hands up, all those who agree you can't convert to Hinduism. Oh, one brave soul. What's that? You can't convert into Hinduism.
People's choice. What do you mean by conversion?
Aha.
The important thing is, are you changing the thoughts or opinion of the people? Mm-hmm. Everyone can change, because everyone is ignorant.
Intelligent man.
Ignorance can be removed.
Yeah.
Conversion is there.
Okay, I'll give the lecture. But so if we look at so anyway, I asked that question and one brave soul put his hand up, and maybe I'll ask other questions and hopefully we'll get other answers. Feel free. But what do we mean by conversion? So it's important. Now I have some dictionary definitions. The Webster Dictionary says a conversion is a successful attempt at scoring extra points in rugby. So it has many definitions. Oxford Dictionary says a change of faith or other beliefs. Right? So and we recognize that definition, I think. A change of faith or other beliefs. It's about belief, basically. Another online dictionary, Google, famous in song and verse these days, the fact of changing one's religion or beliefs or the action of persuading someone else to change theirs. So as conversion is you're personally converting or you're influencing someone else to convert. And where does the word conversion, the English word conversion, come from? And it comes from Latin, which isn't unusual, convertere, to modify, to adapt, to change, to alter, or to transform. So it's and that's interesting because that's, in my opinion, a broader definition, the understanding the etymology of the word itself and how it's come to be used. So generally, in most of the dictionaries, I went over quite a number of dictionaries, it's about change of belief. That's a change of religion, and religion is associated with belief. So they're the words kind of used. So let's look at Hindu approaches to conversion. Is Hinduism based on birth? Because that's another, some people say you can't convert to Hinduism, but part of the reason is that you're born a Hindu. You can't enter into it in any other way. How many people would agree with that? Two. We have two. We have three. We have three. We have four. Anyone else? Okay, it's more than one. You've started a trend. Okay, so that's interesting. So we'll explore that a little bit. So you have to be born a Hindu, which is about caste and about jati and about the embodiment. You're actually born into a situation and then you are a certain thing. So maybe you're born a Muslim, you're born a Christian as well. These are issues. Once you start talking like being born a Hindu, you have to start expanding it to see how it fits other models as well. Now, all Indian religions they welcome people who find them, shall we say, however they find them. So the Jains, for instance, traditionally, anyone who takes the 5 vows of Jainism, and interestingly, their 5 vows are all practices. They're all things that you do. So you don't actually sign up to a belief in anything. You sign up to a practice of something. That's interesting. So there's no ceremony, just a commitment to engage in these practices, one of which famously is Ahimsa. In Buddhism, one takes refuge. They don't talk about converting, they talk about taking refuge. You take refuge under someone in the Sangha of Buddhism. And historically, there have been many mass conversions in Buddhism. Whole nation states have converted practically overnight. And these are old Indian processes. Now, we can say that these are not Hindu processes, but it's important to see the context, what's going on in the subcontinent and how is the subcontinent influencing the world. Because in some of these, the Jains were very popular all over India at one stage, as were the Buddhists, but the Buddhists went much further than India and went all through Southeast Asia and all through East Asia, right up to Japan, as we know, and Fiji and Bali and all those places. So their influence has been vast. And Hindu influence was there before them. So was there an idea of conversion when the Hindus were there, before the Buddhists? Now, the late Vedic scholar Fritz Stahl saw Hindu traditions as being based on practice, not belief. He made that generalization. The primacy of practice, that this is also shared by Professor Gavin Flood in Oxford, has said the same thing in his book, Introduction to Hinduism, as have a number of other scholars. So they're observing kind of from outside the tradition and trying to define Hinduism, which is a very difficult task. But one thing that they come out with is the primacy of practice, that practice is more important than belief. Now, it's interesting, our definition has been about belief. It hasn't really mentioned practice in the same way. So we understand a person's character through their practice, not their belief. And that's been a common understanding on the Indian subcontinent, not just among Hindus, among Jains, among Sikhs, among Buddhists, among everyone in India. I would include Christians and Muslims and Farsis, tribal religions, etc. There's just this common understanding that when you look to someone, you look to their practice. Whatever they believe is kind of immaterial because you don't really understand it anyway. You know, if I go down to South India and I don't speak Tamil, I don't even know if they say what they believe, I don't even understand them. But I can see what they do. And I immediately understand the quality of a person. You know, so the primacy of practice in a plural society, which India always has been, you can see how it just makes sense in terms of understanding who is about you. And therefore, how do you take a guru seriously? When you meet someone who is supposedly enlightened, how do you recognize enlightenment? Well, the first thing is they need to adhere to Dharma, or they need or some standards that you recognize to meet, so that you take them seriously enough to even start to listen to them. So you're looking to their practice. And that's why the idea of a guru, which means teacher, is very important in Indian tradition. It makes common sense. It's very important in every society. But the idea of an Acharya, one who teaches by example, one to whom you look at their practice. So it's not simply about that they're teaching you something, but they embody the teaching. That becomes primary. So that the Acharya is highly valued in this cultural context because of the primacy of practice. Practice is more important than belief. And it leads to an interesting understanding of pluralism. So it means that you will look at someone's practice and they'll come off a boat and say, I'm a Christian and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't mean anything to you. But then you ask them what you do, and they tell you what to do, and actually you're very impressed. The fact that they're a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, isn't important, which means there's a tremendous openness to in your search for spirituality. You're willing to look here, look there, and borrow this and borrow that, which, as we see, that's how Hinduism has always operated. So this is a distinction traditional Hinduism could draw with religions proposing a primacy of belief. Hinduism has a primacy of practice, as do, as I say, most Indian religions. I would say that many enlightened teachers from around the world in different world traditions also start to talk about a primacy of practice. But it is a case in established institutional religions, they generally talk about a primacy of belief because it's easier to deal with bureaucratically. If someone can sign a form and say, I believe in such and such, tick, 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 tick. So you've signed up to something coherent that they can say, do you believe it or not? Yes. Good, you remember. Do you practice it or not? How do you police their practice? You have to actually live with them all day. You don't want to do that. You have to look in their fridge and see if they're vegetarian and stuff. So that doesn't work. Yes. So is Hinduism then based on birth or practice? Practice. Or both. Because one could cancel out the other. And so I just throwing out, these are the things we deal with in Oxford,
It depends on what you perceive as a Hindu, what is Hindu. If it is like a nation or the practice as we call it, then yes, everybody who's born there is Hindu. But if you look at that from the thought process, then anybody can be Hindu regardless of whether they are born or not.
So we have two definitions there.
It depends on how you perceive.
So one is a geographical birth issue, and the other is an intellectual or maybe more spiritual. Okay, so it could be both, depending who you're talking to. Well, it's interesting. Hindu texts. Let's look at the literature itself, and so we're talking about the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Agamas, the Puranas, the Itihasas. They don't say that the goal of life is to be a Hindu. They don't put a name on it, as to who you should be at the end of the process. They don't stick a name as you should be a Christian or a Hindu or any such thing. What do they say? Dharma?
I think we are differentiating between two facts. One is the religion, which is Dharma in Sanskrit, and another is the opinion, which is called Matam. And
Now,
what we are mixing it up is the Matam with the Dharma. And that two are very confusing because
I actually want to mix it up a little bit more than that. So I've only started. Yeah. So save it till the end, and then you can expand your list and make a bigger point. But the goals, shall we say, because there's more than one. It depends who you're talking to, right? Are moksha, liberation, bhakti, love, gyan, knowledge, purity, dharma, seva, virtue. So it depends what passage you're reading. It depends who you're more inspired by as to what their angle is. And they're emphasizing one thing so that you get into that, and that's your way in, because that inspires you personally. So some people are sevaks. They just live for seva. Some people are bhaktas. Some people are jnanis. Everyone's got their angle. Some people are totally into detachment. Let's just detach ourselves. It's all a mess. Let's just back off from the whole thing. Just live in a cave somewhere and don't talk to people because they're a trip. We can all relate to that. So they're about rising from tamas to sattva. It's very interesting in a very good academic study by a scholar in Switzerland, Angelica Malner. She lived in India for 2 years, and she discerned that everyone in India, no matter where you went, even in a tiny little village, where they didn't really know the religion, she would have an academic understanding of what they're doing, and she could give it a name, but they didn't have a name for it like that. But what they understood was sattva. They were all aspiring to be pure, to be good, to be knowledgeable, to be higher, to be more. It's a very Indian thing. I mean, look at how you treat your kids. A grades, distinctions. So, you recognize it. So there's an aspiration for sattva, to go from tamas. You don't want darkness. You don't want ignorance. You don't want lethargy. You don't want to be in the gutter drunk. You want to be more than that. So from tamas to sattva, from rascal to respectable, basically, from envy to love. So from rascal to respectable is about dharma, is about doing the right thing. And we all have a tendency to do what pleases us, and the comfortable thing, the easy thing, but we're all challenged on a daily basis to do the right thing, and we always know what it is. There's always a little voice in our head nattering away. From envy to love. So what's envy? Envy is greed and anger and lust and these things. And it's wanting to be the famous person, wanting to be the football star. And well, David Beckham is the football star, and you want to be him, or you want to be the pop star, etc. So aspiring to be someone else, aspiring to be like someone else, worshipping someone else for who they are, which is idol worship. It's not really, it's not attainable, number one, but it's not in their gift to give you either, but it's not even a worthy desire, and those people aren't even happy. So in learning how to give up such envy in the name of love. So it forces you to define love, and that's a big discussion in Hindu culture. So what are the stated goals? None of them say to be a Hindu. None of them say to be a part of a certain institution, sect, religion. These are kind of bigger goals. To become from a rascal to a respectable person is a bigger issue. I can slap the name Hindu on my head, I can wear dhoti and kurta and tilak of some kind and do all that kind of stuff and go around chanting mantras and not change from a rascal to become a respectable person, or not give up my envy and learn how to love, or not, become sattvic or attain moksha or any of the goals that Hindu texts talk about. So they don't talk about a certain type of lifestyle or a certain type of clothes in a religious context at all. Which is very interesting, because the idea of belief means that you sign up to a certain set of beliefs and you tick a box and say, this is what I clearly believe. It doesn't leave much room for development, maybe. It means if you want virtue, then what do you believe in? Well, it's a practice. It's a way of life that helps you become compassionate or tolerant or humble or wise, so that you develop these virtues. How do you become compassionate? Well, Ahimsa is a principle that you have to adopt in your life if you want to become compassionate, Hindu texts would say, clear across the board. So you have to give up violence. You have to give up cruelty on every level, no matter how subtle. So then we begin to see what are the issues of these texts. And the issues of these texts are not joining one religion or another. There's no discussion about that. There's no interest in that. So what defines our spirituality is our practice. And practices include, how do you develop all this? Yoga, Tantra, Bhakti, mantras, pujas, vandanam, prayer, meditation, tapasya, so many practices. So I'm just naming a few. And I start with something like Tantra, and you kind of go, Tantra, or we don't do Tantra. You're thinking of 1970s books about sexual positions. That's not Tantra. Tantra is much more profound than that, and much more pervasive in Hinduism than you imagine. Absolutely. And still claim, anyone can claim to be a Hindu. Anyone can claim to be Napoleon. It is as free as that. Anyone can claim. No one's going to stop anyone claiming to be a Hindu. But the issue. No. If you say that these are all people that Hindus by birth, if we look at yoga is being developed all over the world by Western people. It's not being developed. It's only started to take hold in India in the last 5 years. You know, traditional yoga has been in ashrams, but now it's all over Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata and Madras. There's yoga studios spring up. But these are yoga studios that are aping California, not traditional ashrams down the road. You know, and people are spending money hand over leg and going around with yoga mats and in skin-tight clothes and all that kind of stuff. So what's that? Is that Hinduism or is that commercialism? Well, and the people doing it are quite convinced it's yoga of a traditional method. So these definitions are a bit difficult. So I throw it out there. And also the importance of a good birth, considered very highly in Hinduism. And it's all to become free from samsara and from anxiety. Everyone wants to be free from anxiety. Vaikuntha, the word Vaikuntha means free from anxiety. That's one of the goals of Hindu culture, clearly stated in many texts. And is there the possibility of conversion by reincarnation? Just say, I'm not born a Hindu, but I want to be a Hindu. Can I do things in this life so in my next life I become a Hindu? It's an interesting angle on conversion. Let's tell the story of Narada Muni. Everyone's heard of Narada Muni, have you? I mean, most people have certainly heard of Narada Muni. Does anyone know how Narada Muni became who he became? He had to come from being someone else to be Narada Muni. It took 3 lifetimes. So there is an idea of conversion by reincarnation. He changed religion, shall we say. So he went from being a Gandharva. Gandharvas are kind of like angels. In Indian culture, they're not considered very highly. You know, as you know, they're rascals. They got wings and everything and fly about and they got powers, but you wouldn't trust them. And he was a bit of a rascal. And he was a beautiful singer and musician, but he would sing popular songs and not praise the Supreme. So the demigods kicked him out, cursed him. So he became a Sudra in his next life. And his mother was a simple woman. Father, there's no mention of the father, which possibly means, well, it doesn't sound good in those days. And these sadhus were following Chaturmas, so they stayed for 4 months in a house, and the mother served them, and he served them as well. And they took mercy on this young chap, these sadhus, and they gave him prasad. So he would come regularly and do some seva, and he'd give them prasad, because they liked his attitude. He was a humble young chap. And with this prasad, he developed spiritually, and he began to practice as these sadhus were practicing, and he became very purified by their practice. And in his next life, he became Narada Muni. And Narada Muni is a very specific position. It's an extraordinary position. So he became something extraordinary. So he went very much from rascal to respectable over a period of 3 lives. Well, in this story, you definitely carry your spiritual attributes. You don't carry the same nose. Thank God in some cases. Well, we can do plastic surgery, but you can't about your spiritual attributes. So he developed spiritually, but our spiritual dimension is not affected by the material change of body. That's the theory behind that story. So the point, making our personal journey may take more than 1 lifetime. So we all understand that. So now all of a sudden, conversion by reincarnation is nearly obvious. We all understood that anyway, but we're just putting words on it, shall we say, looking at it in terms of that's actually a process of conversion. We change, we transform. These are the words used in the Latin understanding of the word conversion. So this is a Hindu understanding of the word conversion. So
the question here is, I read somewhere that you don't get human life. After 1 human life, you don't get second human life immediately after that, isn't it?
Well,
It's like you get animal
Yeah, we could do a whole. Yeah, we could do a whole class on reincarnation and karma, and we're not going to do it today. Okay, but has been said that once you get a human life, you have to work hard to get rid of it. You know, you have to actually work hard to degenerate, and some of us are successful at that, unfortunately. But so anyway, we have a human life. We're having this discussion. That's the privilege of a human life, and so as we have it, being that the case that there is conversion by reincarnation, does that mean that someone who is now a Muslim or a Christian could, in the future, become, in their journey, reach the desired destination of Hindu enlightenment? If as Northern, so I'm just saying, and could it be the case that it's actually vice versa as well, that a Hindu reaches the stage of Muslim enlightenment? Maybe that's the most. If someone is actually very saintly, is a saintly person as a Muslim or a Hindu more valuable, or are they the same? Well, anyway, I just throw that out there. But reincarnation by conversion starts to open the field up very broadly indeed. So conversion, change, transformation becomes an interesting idea in Hinduism. It's actually a very broad-minded idea, more broad-minded than most Hindus can deal with, I would suggest. Yeah, so it really opens the thing up intellectually and philosophically. It becomes not just a religious discussion, it becomes a philosophical discussion, a much broader social discussion. How do you interact with people? Well, if this person in another lifetime could become more enlightened than I could ever be, how do I treat them now? You know, it becomes an issue. And let's look at some formal conversion methods. Let's look at conversion methods that actually look like conversion as we started the discussion. So someone has a belief system and they come at you in the street and say, this is the belief system. If you don't follow this system, your ears are going to fall off. You're going to end up in hell and Yamadutas are going to come and get you and stuff, right? So that we recognize that as the persuasion methods. How do we persuade people? So what methods do we have that conform to this that our dictionaries may recognize? Does anyone know? Does Hinduism have any methods that are akin to Christian conversion? We have many. I've heard many arguments by Hindus about Christian conversion, how terrible it is. Arya Samaj, the Shuddhi ritual. So Arya Samajis came up with a ritual in the 19th century that was most definitely influenced by the Christians. And they came up with a ritual where there's a homa, there's a havan, and you go through the havan, and then you get a certificate saying that you're a Hindu. What's that? Brahma Samaj used to have something, but I don't know if they have anything anymore. But anyway, we're just giving whatever examples we can give it. Arya Samaj definitely have something. And they give a certificate. Certifying what? What can they certify? You've only walked in the door, have a havand. You say, I put your hand up, I'm going to be a Hindu. So they give you a certificate saying you're a Hindu, and maybe a Sanskrit name. What have they certified exactly? Nothing about your practice. They haven't even questioned your practice. So they're certifying on the basis of belief. And that is very much the Christian model and very much not the Hindu model. So it's just interesting to analyze the primacy of belief and the primacy of practice. It doesn't conform to the primacy of practice. It conforms to a different model. So here are Hindus in the 19th century saying basically that, now, either through ignorance of the Hindu system, not having thought it through, or through wanting to look good in the British eyes, and we have to remember the British were the ascendancy. They controlled everything in those days, so that wasn't unusual to want to look good in their eyes. But through either process, they've come up with a system that is not as Indian as it may previously have been. Our Anuradha, as you know, she's come and given talks here. She was in the Meenakshi temple in India, and she went and tried to get in, and she was in a sari and everything, and they refused her entry. And they said she had to become a Hindu. And she said, well, I'm already a Hindu. I said, well, we need a certificate. So they sent her down to the Arya Samaj. And she spent 3 days trying to get a certificate. And you know, and she thought she'd do it just, for what the hell, I just want to go in and get the blessings and, you know, and have been to, And she couldn't get the certificate. Every time she went, the priest was out and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was just ridiculous. And in the end, she started to feel a little bit ashamed. What am I doing this for? You know, pandering to these people. I have to pay them money to become something, to be certified as something I've already been for like 25 years. So, you know, it started to become an issue in her head. What is she up to? But
Caroline gets in by putting her sari over her head and sort of concealing herself so they don't actually see her face, and she just walks in with other Indian people.
She cheats.
Oh, she cheats.
And that's Dharma. That's Dharma, is it?
It's not.
Anyway, I got you. Yeah.
I think the Arya Samaj tradition is very recent because Arya Samaj is not formed very long ago. It is, most of it they try to convert those who were already Hindu.
Yeah, it's from the 1830s.
And came back to the Hinduism.
Yeah.
So like Gandhi's son, who got converted into Muslims, and next day they converted him again back into Hindu.
Yeah. So they have a process by which they convert them. But my point.
Should be current.
No,
Even if you go abroad and cross the sea, people will do that. There is a process for that.
There's a process for that. But my point is that this process is a response to Christian conversion methods, and it's a new thing. I'm just saying it's new. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just a new thing, and understand that it is a response to Christian conversion methods and conforms with the Christian philosophy behind conversion, not the Hindu approach itself. But because it does, it has become part of the Hindu approach. So we have to note it here. Now, there's also, the VHP have started a process of conversion. So we've heard of that. Grahavaspi, the homecoming ceremony. So Praveen Togadia, as you may have heard of, made the claim, our aim is making India as Hindu country as it was once upon a time. Now, to me, that doesn't sound too different from the claim of Christians going to India saying, we will make this a Christian country as it should have always been. Right? So I'm just saying the claim, it's interesting that once upon a time, India was a Hindu country. But interestingly, the further back you go, the less Hindu it was. I mean, the word Hindu didn't even exist in actual fact if you go back far enough. And if you go back far enough, it was a Buddhist country. You know, the subcontinent was mainly Buddhist, and it wasn't even Hindu at all. So, and at a certain point, it was Vedic, and it's even questionable if Vedic is kind of Hindu in the ritual sense and all that. So, and then in the Hindu in January of this year, we have a quote from the VHP. We have set a target of 1 lakh reconversions before the 1000th birth anniversary of the Vaishnavite philosopher Sri Ramanuja in 2017. And this is the beginning. This is a mission. This is missionary work, right? So we're going to reconvert people who have been Christians or Muslims and all that kind of stuff, which is great. Conversion to what? Exactly. Is that a belief that Hindu is intrinsically right and Indian? So to be Hindu is to be right. And it also means to be Hindu means to be Indian, because that's what it seems to say. It's a nationalistic claim, and it's a righteous claim that Hinduism is superior to other traditions. That's a very interesting claim, because I don't see that made in any of the texts. The texts are about an inquiry into truth, wherever you may find it, and it leaves the individual find their own truth, so wherever they may find it. It has that liberalism, and it leaves choice. So it's not primacy of practice, now also we have primacy of choice. So we have two issues that if you take away choice, that doesn't begin to sound good. It doesn't begin to sound Indian in a more traditional sense, you could say, even before India existed, as you say.
Don't you think it's based on a belief that they were born Hindus, and that's why we're reconverting them back to what they were? Do you think that's their belief?
Well, the thing is, you'd have to question what being born a Hindu in the 12th century meant.
No, I mean, these people who are trying to reconvert people now.
Yeah.
Who have become Christian or...
Yeah, but also their assumption is that in the good old days, everyone was a Hindu. People didn't see it like that in the good old days. We know that from the texts. And a lot, yeah, and a lot of people were Buddhists. So, and a lot of people were Jains, and a lot of people had no specific religion at all, as is the case today. I meet Hindus and they don't have any particular religious affiliation. They just say, I'm a Hindu. What do you mean Hindu? I go to Janmashtami once a year. Or something. They do Raksha Bandhan. So I'm just saying, what does it mean? Conversion to what? And what is the historical record? It's really not as clear as that, I don't think. Is this belief model not just a response to Christian mission? Because it's a belief model. It's not a practice model. They're not asking them to practice anything. They're just asking them to sign up and say, I am a Hindu. Whatever that means remains ill-defined. And it's not based on practice, which is actually quite defined. And imitation is the best form of praise. So in actual fact, even though they're trying to respond positively to Christianity, they're saying that Christianity is the big church and we're the small church and we're learning from you. So if you just analyze what's actually going on. So the Christian model has taken leadership in this discourse. That would be my analysis, and it's open to discussion. But also, what then of Ashoka? We go back to the India as it used to be. Ashoka was a Hindu who became a Buddhist, and all of India practically became Buddhist at that time. What about Chandragupta Maurya, another great king, who became a Jain, and had huge influence, mass conversion into Jainism, and big discourse at the time between Brahmins and Jains and Brahmins and different sects, the Vaishnavites, the Shaivites, and the Jains and the Buddhists. A lot of discourse, philosophical discourse, going back and forth. So conversion was definitely an issue in ancient India, and it wasn't just simply that it was just a land full of Hindus. It really wasn't as simple as that. And what of the 2,000-year-old Indian Christian presence of people who chose to become Christians 2,000 years ago? Should they become Hindu again because 2,000 years ago one of their forefathers was a Hindu? Well, in actual fact, we don't know. It could have been a Buddhist. So we're going to reconvert them? And that's an issue. 1,000 years ago, people were becoming Muslims. Are we going to say that 1,000 years isn't good enough? That's not enough choice. We haven't had enough time to reconsider this. These are issues. These are questions that need to be asked in terms of conversion, reconversion, these kind of things. The fact is that Christianity is Indian. Islam is Indian. Indian Islam is a very different form of Islam than Middle Eastern Islam. Very different model altogether. So rather than react against it, maybe embrace it. Maybe discourse with it, of how, look at its Indianness, and what are the issues of Indian Islam as distinct from other forms of Islam, of Indian Christianity as distinct from other forms of Christianity. And, of course, what about the Farsis? Are we going to reconvert the Farsis? How many did Farsis convert? Did they just all come from the Middle East? Or what are the, because they're Indian, they should be Hindus? Or how do you negotiate that? Tribal religions. You go to the tribal areas, you never hear anyone talking about their religion. Pretty funky stuff. If you want to broaden the horizons of Indian religion, they have very interesting practices of Naga worship and all kinds of things that some people say is just superstitious, but it's precious to them. Is that Indian? Were they Hindu? In fact, there's no historical record of them ever having been Hindu in any discernible way. Definitely Indian and definitely borrowing from this and that, but Brahmins never went to their village. They never heard Sanskrit. So there are issues there as well. Now, Professor Arvind Sharma in Canada says that Hindus very much engage in mission, always have done, but that they don't proselytize. That's his claim. Proselytize means, it has come to mean forcibly, aggressively missionize. Certainly Hindus visited Burma, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and these countries became very influenced by Hinduism and Buddhism in succession. When I say very influenced, they were conquered by Hindu states, and huge temple complexes were built, and they weren't built for nothing. People were worshipping there, and people still continue to worship. You go into Bangkok airport, and there's a huge, big model of the churning of the Milk Ocean, and huge, big dioramas of the Ramayana. These are their national stories. This is the extent of the influence. Sanskrit is a revered language in these countries. Buddhist monks are revered in these countries. So it's all examples of the influence of Indian culture and Indian philosophy and Indian religion. So someone converted someone, something happened. Now, should India, with all integrity, support a movement for those people to de-Hinduize? Because, was it right to go there and convert them like that? So the conversion issue, Hindus are arch converters. They're very good at it, been very successful indeed. Hindu sampradayas.
But they wouldn't have used violence, would they? It would be, if Ahimsa is...
Well.
There are different ways. I mean, the Muslims in India...
Well, let me give you an unfortunate example.
Forcibly converted.
Forcibly converted, of course they were. There's a 12th century Shaivite text called the Pariva Puranam, which speaks of violence in the name of Shiva, very much jihad, against Jains. These things were going on. This is in the texts. So we know that these things were discussed. Did they go on in big movements? No, it wasn't huge, but there were fights, and a lot of people did die. We know that. There were intersectarian fights going on, and we don't talk about it very much because, we keep these things in the family. It's a very, very Indian tradition, isn't it? Domestic violence and abuse and all that. Don't talk about it. You've done very well to keep it out of the news. But the fact is, if we look into it, these things are there. Now, is it the essence of Hinduism? No. Is it normal when people, take things too seriously and all that? Yes. The normal course of life? Yes, absolutely. And you find that in many of the sampradayas, and there's a lot of talk about Sanatana Dharma, and it's not sampradaya-based and all this stuff. The sampradayas are the basis of the understanding of Sanatana Dharma. So these sampradayas are actually very important parts of the history and are still the most influential aspects of Hinduism. So you can't cut them out of the loop as easily as that. The sampradayas are very clear that only they really understand the truth. That's crystal clear. The Vaishnavas, the Shaivites, the Shaktas, the Smartas, the Advaitins, they've all got their angle, and they all make an issue of it, and they all have a hierarchy as to who's right and who's wrong, and it's crystal clear who's at the top and who's at the bottom. And if you talk to one, it's them, and if you talk to another, it's definitely not them, not those ones. But when we bore down, we see that who they are, we find that they are members whose practice is most sincere. So when they say that they really understand the truth, and they have their hierarchies and everything like that, but it's very interesting that it's the it's the practitioners that become the sadhus. So there'll be a revered Shaivite saint, and you'll have Vaishnavites and Shaktas and Smartas and Advaitin all going there. So there's no issue then. So it's about the sincerity of practice of an individual that, again, has the primacy. Even though someone is crystal clear, I'm a Shaivite, like you're a South Indian Shaivite with your huge big tilak, and you will not enter Vaishnavite, you will not enter a Shaiva temple. But then if there's a big prabhachan by someone who's very, very holy, you'll find people all going in the back door. No issue. Because the idea of Acharya, of practice, has always been more important. And so those whose spiritual experience is seen in all that they say and do, those who teach by example. But if a member of another tradition, Indian or otherwise, achieves the same qualities by another practice, they tend to be equally respected. So their members seem to have no difficulty seeing their own truth in another temple, church, mosque, ritual, yoga practice, meditation, mantra, or prayer. So they'll see their embodiment of the divine in another practice. So they'll go to a synagogue or anywhere, and they won't have an issue. This is a phenomenon of Hinduism. They'll go to another place of worship and sit down and go through the whole process, and they'll see their own divinity being worshipped. They won't see it necessarily as a sectarian thing. Now, having said that, if we look at Vivekananda, for instance, so a kind of someone who made a brilliant communicator, made Hinduism very approachable and simple, but we have to be clear what form of Hinduism. It's a form of neo-Vedantic Hinduism. It's not traditional Vedanta. Sankaracharya would not agree with Vivekananda. There's no doubt about that. Yet Vivekananda is saying that he's representing Shankaracharya, but he's representing Ramakrishna more. And this is a more eclectic understanding of Advaita. So he will develop a spiritual hierarchy. He says, it's kind of a summation, the same God whom the ignorant man saw outside nature, he calls Dvaita. That's the ignorant man is Advaita, right? So he puts the Dvaitans in their place, right? They're the ignorant man. The same whom the little knowing man saw as interpreting the universe, Vishishta Dvaita, just a little bit up from the ignorant man. So that's the Ramanujans and all the Vaishnavas and all that. And the same whom the sage realizes as his own self, as the whole universe itself, Advaita. All are the one and the same being, the same entity seen from different standpoints. And again, the question might be raised as to the extent of the tolerance inherent in such a position. So he's saying, look at the tolerance of this position. It's all one. They're all from different standpoints looking at the same thing. But in actual fact, what he's saying is, those guys are really ignorant, and they're just a step up, and the Advaitins, they really got it down. So it's actually quite sectarian. It's not actually tolerant. It's tolerant just, just about. So it's very intelligently put together. But you get the same thing from the Bhagavatam, the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the second chapter. Vedanti tata vedas tatvamyas jnanam advayam brahmati paramatmati bhagavanati shabjate. So he says the truth is realized by those who see the truth in three phases: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So they reverse Vivekananda's understanding. It's a completely different truth claim. These are two traditions with very different truth claims. So it's important for us to know that people do convert into one thing and another thing. And they are expected to drop that thing in favor of this thing. They're very different ways of thinking. So there is an impetus to convert. Now, is there an impetus to be kind to others and pluralistic? That's there as well. And I think that's something we have to take into account as well. So it's not in-your-face religion in India. It's on-your-face religion. Big tilaks going this way and that way and dots and everything. And you look at it and you know where the person's at. So they're declaring themselves in a sectarian way. That I'm a Vaishnavite, and you got the thing down the middle. I'm a North Tamil Vaishnava. I'm a South Tamil Vaishnava. They don't go on with each other. So, and then you get different types of Shaivites. You get Kashmir Shaivites who do all kinds of strange things. The strangest of strange things. So, you can recognize someone and you understand by their tilak what their practice is. It doesn't mean you don't disrespect them. Their practice could be very, very good, very admirable. It's just that you don't sign up to everything, or you don't sign up to that practice. So we certainly do have a number of conversion models in the Hindu traditions. Some look very much like Christian models, and some look different. So let's explore the issue of transformation, because conversion in Hinduism isn't about the ones who are aping the Christian models. They're actually about the processes of transformation. That's what we see in the literature. Let's go back to Narada's story. There's some interesting components. He's a Gandharva of low character. Then he's born in a low family. He hasn't got it going for him. He's born in a family where it's even questionable if he's a Hindu. Right? So according to if you're a Hindu by birth. He's favored by sadhus for his humility and serving attitude, and this is his qualification. And he takes up the practice. So these are the components of transformation that we see replicated story after story after story. The robber Ratnakar, right, a thief, a robber, more than a thief, he's actually a violent thief, becomes Valmiki, the sadhu, the poet, the gentle person. Total transformation, from rascal to respectable. So it's about transformation. The issue is to elevate the desire, to transform character, to achieve enlightenment, to turn lust into love. That's what the issue is. And that's going back to the traditional Hindu approaches to change and transformation within the self. However you can find to do that. So many examples. Every piece of literature you pick up has an example of such transformation. And you'll see the processes of transformation. So you have examples, the four Kumaras. Have you heard of the four Kumaras? Have you heard of Dhruva Maharaj, the North Pole star? So his process, Arjuna on the battlefield. What is that but transformation? He goes from depressed, eunuch-like individual, and Krishna calls him a eunuch, which isn't the best thing to call a warrior, to taking up his bow and getting out and fighting. Totally transformed. He changes his religion during that period. He takes up spirituality. He uses spirituality. He's not enthused religiously. He doesn't find a good religious reason to fight. He fights because of a spiritual reason. He's gone beyond religion, beyond that discourse. He totally transforms in character. He changes himself. The Haryashvas, do you know the story of the Haryashvas? Puranic story. So Narada Muni again. Narada Muni's all over the place. Narada Muni comes along. Daksha is told by Brahma to, populate the universe. Great job for a young man. So he starts to populate the universe. So he has 100 sons, the Haryashvas. These are all very qualified individuals coming from him, his genetic seed. These are the top. So they all are brahmacharis, and they reach a certain level of perfection. He sends them off to meditate and prepare themselves for grihastha life, because to be a good grihastha, you have to prepare yourself and become a person of good character. And they were doing that beautifully, and they were all up in the Himalayas, all meditating, 100 of them all together. Wonderful little ashram going on. And Narada Muni's passing by, and as usual, Narada Muni puts the mix in. And he goes to the Haryashvas and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "We're all doing this meditation." "Why are you doing meditation?" "To become grihastas." "You're doing all this meditation to be grihastas. Do you know what it is to be a grihasta? It means your wife is going to wrap you around her little finger, and your children are going to suck you dry, and then they're just going to spit you out at the end of it. What are you meditating for that? You can achieve liberation. With the work you're doing, you're just an inch away. You can just, finish this material existence and be done with it. Why waste your time?" Now, in actual fact, what he's saying, very interestingly, is going against every religious strand in Hinduism. He's going against Dharma. He's telling them to disrespect his father and his order. He's telling them to go against the social order. Forget about Varnashram system. Forget about, Purusharta and all these processes that are recommended. Forget all that stuff. Just jack it in. And because it was Narada Muni, they took his advice seriously, and they all jacked it in. And Daksha was very displeased. So he had another 100 sons. And Narada did the same. That's conversion. He took them from one path and led them on to a different path. And it was all based on practice, not belief system. There's no discussion what religion they became. Whether they became Hindus or Jains or Buddha, whatever sect they became. No discussion about that. It's simply about their practice. Their practice was perfect for either becoming a good grihastha or liberation. They just had to tweak their desire, just focus the goal. So liberation is a common desire. It's for everybody. No Hindu religion. When you hear about salvation in Christianity, you recognize the same aspiration. So what are the traditional ways to make the beginning of the journey? What are the traditional ways of transformation if they're not the conversion methods we discussed? And it's about Deeksha, mainly. Initiation. You accept Deeksha from a guru. There's Tantric Deeksha, Vedic Deeksha, and there's Brahminical Deeksha. And interestingly, Brahminical Deeksha is called Dvija, becoming born again. Have you heard that term before? Christianity have the idea of becoming spiritually born again. So this Deeksha, where you, in your childhood for Vedic study, in the higher castes, you're invited to take rebirth, a spiritual birth. You've been born materially, now take another birth. Vedic Deeksha is very interesting because in Vedic Deeksha, you're doing a yajna, Rajasuya yajna, or Ashwamedha yajna, or some such thing, and the sponsor of the yajna is brought into the sacred arena, which can be quite large, and for the duration, which could be 5 to 7 days for a big yajna, has to live in that arena and is purified in the arena and given Deeksha for the period of the yajna, and after the yajna is kind of undikshad. So the initiation only lasts for the period. So they have to be sattvic for that period and act properly. And then at the end of it, it's akin, being in the yajna is akin to being in the womb, and then you are reborn after the yajna. So again, the idea of rebirth, a spiritual birth, a purification. You go through a process of purification, and it resets the machine. It's an upgrade, shall we call it. And then Tantric Deeksha, and we say, well, what have we got to do with Tantric Deeksha? But actually, most Deeksha in Indian culture is Tantric Deeksha. Now, who are the Tantras? The Tantras are people that say what binds you can also set you free. That's the basic philosophy of Tantra. So you use the material in order to get out of it. And you can understand that a lot of Indian culture, spiritual culture, is using tantric methods. For instance, can you recognize any of those? Using the material elements in order to purify yourself, to elevate yourself? What are tantric processes? Hands up all of those who perform tantric processes. Engage in tantra of any kind. Hands up all of those who go to temples and worship murtis. Hands up all of those who do puja of any kind. These are tantric processes. So Tantra has had a huge influence on Hinduism that nobody really knows. So you are engaged regularly in tantric processes. Now that's right-hand Tantra. Left-hand Tantra is more Kashmir Shaivism and a few other processes. And they say that it's why make a distinction between good and bad. So all material things, everything material can, because the right-hand Tantra are into sattva and tamas, they make distinctions. And they say, well, it's just artificial, it's Maya to make distinctions. So you should roll around in stool and urine. You should cover yourself in ashes from the crematorium. You should smother your head with sexual fluids and all this kind of stuff. So they become detached from all material designations. And there's a reason why few people practice left-hand Tantra. That's definitely the left-hand Tantra. Yes. And there's a text by Sanatan Goswami from Bengali Goswami from the 15th century. He says, as one can transform bell metal into gold by the alchemical process, one can also turn a low-born man into a Brahmin by initiating him properly into spiritual activities. So this Diksha process was considered very important. Once you take Diksha, it means that you give up all idea of caste. You give up all social designations. So you forget about all that. You go into a different mode. So these spiritual initiations, these are the ones that you recognize in Hindu culture today more than the others. And I'd just like to make in conclusion, make a few personal reflections. Wikipedia says that I'm a convert from Christianity. Right? Someone told Wikipedia, I don't know. I don't see myself in those terms. So I don't know what to do about Wikipedia. I don't know how you change that. And I'm up there forever as a convert, and that's it. I've always resisted being called a convert. But I do know that I'm responding to popular definitions of conversion. I don't relate to the ideas of conversion that posit an either-or approach, that I have to be a Christian or a Hindu. It doesn't make sense to me. And in terms of... Pardon?
Can one be both?
Here I am. In terms of thinking... But the thing is, do Hindus accept that? Do Christians accept that? I don't know. I'm just talking about me. So I get Christians who have no idea what I'm talking about. I get Hindus who have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to share with you my personal experience, which doesn't seem to sit into inside or outside the box. For me, it's why inside or outside the box? Why not both? Why make an issue of it? It's not a question of samosas or pakoras. It's samosas and pakoras. Maybe I'm greedy. I don't know. I can accept a process of evolving transformation. If I want to define conversion in my own terms, I can accept an evolving process of conversion, of transformation, because that's actually what's happening to me. What we might call continual conversion. So, for instance, my realizations now are profoundly different than they were 5 years ago. Thank God, I say. Because it shows that I'm getting somewhere. I've transformed utterly in terms of perspective and understanding. And I've allowed myself to transform by not fixing myself in to anywhere. And I do think that that's what the texts are talking about, allowing yourself to develop and not being too fixed with a name that will stratify me and box me in somewhere. In these terms, I convert more and more regularly. My practice and experience are more important now to me than an intellectual ideology or belief or institution. I'm not attached to these things. I'm attached to what will give me a spiritual experience. So whatever the belief is, I can read so many books and someone says, to believe, to be part of this tradition, you have to read all these books. Now, I'm certainly nourished tremendously by all these books, but a lot of people don't read all the books. A lot of people just don't have that intellectual capacity. There's a lot of books in Hinduism. Come on, guys. Yeah. But so where do you get it from? You get it from experience. But that's where I'm getting it from. That's my point. So I'm getting it, and experience is more important to me than being able to say, I sign up to everything in this book. Because when I read the book, the Bhagavad Purana, which is 18,000 verses long, by the time I get to the end, I've forgotten what the start was, number one. But I don't understand half of what I'm reading. The 5th canto of the Bhagavad Purana is mathematics. You have to actually be a mathematician to work it out. You know, it's about cosmology and how the universe operates. And it's fantastic. It's amazing. I know maths professors from Cornell University in America who've tried to make models of it, and they ended up making 3 models of the shape of the planet. What they're saying is that in actual fact, the text seems to be saying that the planet Earth is round and flat and cylindrical, depending on what dimension you're looking at it from. That's very advanced thinking. So they're not getting into a thing about, is it a flat Earth or a round Earth? They're saying it's both. Depends who you are and what way you're seeing it. Depends on your darshan, your perspective. It's very interesting, but I don't understand any of that. You know, because I was never good at maths. I was, being born in India, and you might be a Hindu, but you're generally good at maths. So I've become more open to truth wherever I find it, and needless to say, I understand that no institution or person has a monopoly on truth, either Hinduism or Christianity or Jainism or etc. I'm born outside the Varnashram system, outside of India, outside of the norms of purity. Some may say thus that I'm not a Hindu, although I've never met someone who said to my face that I'm not a Hindu. I'm accepted as a Hindu because I've adopted practices of Hindu sadhana and culture. I'm ambiguous about being called a Hindu, consequently. My issue in getting involved in these practices was to improve my character, to increase my knowledge, and to learn how to love, to come from a bad place to a good place, to come from being a rascal to being respectable. Thank you.
You know, you talked of conversion being like an evolutionary transformation. I can quite equate to that. Going back to what you said about Swami Vivekananda's dualism, qualified dualism, I think that's what you were saying, non-qualified, and then Advaita being. Is that not a process of evolution?
Vivekananda is mixing kind of a Christian process, primacy of belief and primacy of practice. Yeah, so he went to Scottish Churches College in Calcutta, as did Bhaktivedanta Swami, as did Subhash Chandra Bose, as did so many people that we take seriously. But it's interesting where they get their idea of Christianity from, and how they develop their philosophies based on that, and how they respond to it. So he responded by integrating it into his process. So I had no issue with Vivekananda, but I did it just to annoy some people as well, just to stir it up. I did. I was a bit mean, a bit conscious of it, because the fact is, nearly everyone has a hierarchy like this. So I just wanted to point out Vivekananda's, because his is a little hidden. He was a brilliant communicator, so he was able to package things, but he was packaging them for a Western audience or an Indian educated audience, but educated in a British system. So he was very conscious of Christianity and the Enlightenment, the philosophical developments in the West, when he was developed, as he communicated Hinduism. So we have to take that into account. But he is faithful to the fact that it's about transformation of consciousness. And in transformation of consciousness, he says it goes from here to here. And then the Srimad Bhagavatam says, no, it goes exactly the other way. And then you get so many, and everyone has their hierarchy. These hierarchies in the literature go back, like the Bhagavatam is how old? But in Shaivite literature, we also have hierarchies like this. And, in the middle of the hierarchy are atheists and all that, and the bottom of the hierarchy are Vaishnavites. They're the scum of the earth, So it's interesting how the hierarchies are developed, but they're all very different. And it's just... Yes, so processes of transformation coming from where to where. So the person themselves have to discern where to where, and discern who is the teacher and what are the teaching and what are their practices. And this tad viginartat sagurum eva bhikachet. The disciple has to discern who is the guru. The disciple has to choose the guru. And that seems like a contradiction in terms, because you're going to a guru to find out about the process, and you have to know the process you have to know the qualification of the guru before you know it's chicken and egg. But there's something, a little issue of adhikar about that. You have to be actually anxious to really understand. Otherwise, you'll just accept some TV evangelical guru because it's easy. You send off some money and you get some blessings, and that will do. If that's the extent of your inquiry, then you get what you pay for. So where's the transformation? Transformation is in your bank account more than anywhere else. Where's the transformation of consciousness, of character, and these issues? So what are you looking for? And you'll find a guru who says a hierarchy. And everyone will have a hierarchy. That just makes common sense in terms of evolution. But what is the one that makes more sense? And everyone has to decide that for themselves. So we have to convert ourselves.
Says that everyone is born as lower, and by performing the sanskar, janna jayate shudra sanskarat dvijochyate. When you do the sanskar, then they become dvij, second time born. And second time born is born in literature, born in knowledge. So all of us are ignorant. And our spiritual journey depends upon at what level of ignorance we are. And all these things are various levels at which one sees whether it is Shraddha or whether it is Puran or whether it is any Mahabharata. But ultimately if you reach, you have to, and who decides this is your Guru knows at what level you are, so he can guide you properly. So I personally think that there is no conversion as such. If you find the right Guru, he will guide you which level to go to. And all of us are stuck, and everyone is right, whatever they believe. I don't think there is anything wrong in their belief, so long you are practicing it and you are going further.
Yeah, but if someone believes that by having sex with children you're showing your love for them, that's not right.
That doesn't say anywhere there.
Yeah, but the fact is everything
it says in any Shastra.
Yes, so then my point is everything isn't right. So there are norms of behavior. Where do these norms of behavior come from? So if I'm I can say I'm a scientist and I say everything comes from chemicals. Well, then I can go around and killing everyone because everyone's only a bag of chemicals. What do we need morality for, etc. But that scientist won't conform to that. He may be an atheist now, but he's not going to allow you to go around and kill his children. So there are norms of behavior. What are those norms? What do we conform to? So it's not that everyone is right. And when we accept a guru, then we follow that process. So we've signed into a specific process. And that it's important that we understand what's going on. That, I found a guru, some teacher that inspires me. I need to be more inspired. I want to conform. I want to get involved in the process. And the guru will train you up. But that training process is conversion. Because you're transforming, you're changing, you're becoming a different person. You're signing up to become a different person. You're choosing to convert to something else. Much like we convert one chemical by a process into another chemical. So that's conversion, just to show it like materially. But we want that process to happen to us. And we want it to be a spiritual transformation that is conversion. That, I would say, that's the Hindu approach to conversion. So it's not signing up to something and say, stamp, now you are a Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jew, or whatever it is like that. That's not the Hindu approach. We've introduced it into Hinduism. Now it has become part of the Hindu approach because we have the Shuddhi ritual and the Grahavisvas and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's not the traditional approach. Traditional approach is that someone makes a choice and says, I want to change. I want to transform. Now, who will help me transform? How do I learn how to love? How do I learn how to be compassionate? How do I learn how to be humble and wise? And you find a person who can help you to do that. And that you go through that transformation process.
So these notes are written in the Shastras. If you read the Vedas, if you read the Vedanta, most of these things are Satyam, Vad, Dharma, Svatayama from the...
Yeah, it does, but
so they are taught what
but you mentioned the Manusmriti that says we're all born Sudras. But who was ever going to offer me Diksha, Dvija, to be a Brahmin? Who was ever going to offer me that? A white man from Ireland, right? So it may say that in the Shastra, but that's not what's practiced. You don't go to a Dalit and say, okay, you're 12 years old, let's give you a Diksha. There's no question it's going to happen to a Dalit in India. No question it's going to happen to a Muslim. Or I was Christian. So the practice and the precept and, so who's practicing? So I was attracted to someone who would take me as an individual seriously, beyond caste, beyond religion. They would just look at me and see my aspiration and say, I can help. I don't care that you're a Christian, I don't care that you're Irish, I don't care that you're white, I don't care that you're male. These designations, that was impressive to me. I've met so many Indians who are so much less impressive because the fact that I'm not an Indian is an issue, the fact that I'm not a Brahmin is an issue, the fact that I'm white is an issue, and that kind of thing. And in Hinduism, more traditional process, yes, that's a certain way of looking at Hinduism, but that's not the one that attracted me, that made any sense to me. When I read the text, when I meet someone who shows by example that they have a more expansive vision, then, obviously for someone to initiate me, they had to have a more expansive vision. So I have to look a little bit further than the norm. I won't go to some family priest and say, you're a Mishra, you do initiations, here I am. Not going to happen. Doesn't matter what the Shastra says, not going to happen. The way he thinks is different. And he's not going to convert me. So in that sense, Hindus don't convert because he's one of the Hindus that doesn't convert.
You partly touched on the question I was going to ask, but it basically actions. Prabhupada asked the question, do you see a big distinction between compulsory forceful conversion and somebody bribing somebody, giving them benefits, rights, and certain, by money when bribing them, or the last one that you mentioned is you want to change. In my view, there's a big difference between all those three. You talked about the compulsory or forceful one, and also when somebody wants to be changed. Where do you stand on that? And also the second part I was going to ask is belief and practice. I think they go hand in hand.
They do to some extent. I'll remind me of that one. So on the first one, what was the first one again? Forcible, yeah. Forcible and trickery and bribery and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's obviously bogus. If you're on a belief system and you're just totting up numbers, this was the discussion between Celtic Christianity and Roman Christianity. So when St. Patrick came to Ireland to convert the Irish, so he's considered the chap who brought Christianity to Ireland, but Christianity already existed in Ireland. He went specifically to convert the Christians who were already there, because they were Celtic Christians and not Roman Christians, and they practiced differently. So they learned their Christianity. They were Druids, and they learned their Christianity. The Irish Druids went as far as North Africa for their wisdom. So, in the Irish text, you see this swarthy Jesus with black hair and all that kind of stuff. You see peacocks and, but they had a big exchange with France through the big Druidic tradition in France. And they learned their Christianity from the Druids in France. And then they started to practice this. This is a very kind of Indian openness to different practices. So these Druids would become Christians and they would set up a little church, and other Druids would make their altars around that church. And that was perfectly acceptable. Everyone was getting on quite well together, but the Romans came in and said, no, the Roman church said, no, you have to be dominant. That was the Roman way. You have to become the big church, get rid of these altars. We have to become the one true religion because we are the one true religion. And that was changing the nature of the culture, the spiritual understanding of the people. The other issue was, traditionally a Druid, you would come from essentially an upper caste family in Ireland, and you would become a Druid between the ages of 12 and 14. You'd start your apprenticeship, and it was a personal choice you made. So you weren't baptized at birth. You were baptized in majority. So when you made a personal choice, so Celtic Christianity meant, but the Romans were into numbers. So how do you do numbers? Well, how many children do you have? Sprinkle some water on their head. You're all Christians. 15. Can I become a bishop now? More. It's a little bit like that. So that wasn't the game that was being played in Ireland at the time. So if we look at proselytization and bribery and conversion and different forms of conversion, what was going on, different forms of conversion existed in Christianity and still continue to exist in Christianity and other traditions. So it's not just one big monolithic thing. So we have to look then back at Hinduism, and if someone starts to reconvert people by promising them this and that back into Hinduism, what's different about that? It's very superficial. There's no transformative process going on. You're dangling status, social status, and you're more Indian now, and all that kind of stuff. And that's very superficial, very materialistic. It's to do with geography and politics and economy more than anything that's in the texts themselves, which never talk about geography in any significant way, or politics or economy. They actually don't take these things seriously. All the kings become interesting when they leave home and become rishis. When they transform from that, they leave all that behind. That's when they become interesting characters to us in the story. And it's usually when they're kings, they're doing stupid things that we all identify with, but, kind of grown. So it's when they transform into something else by a natural process of spiritual or consciousness development or character development. So that's what the process is about. So if you just dangle some carrots in front of someone and they come at you and sign up to something, that's very superficial. And, the experience is that they last for a while and then just drift because it's not coming from them. So conversion is something we do to ourselves. It can't be done to you. And from the kind of Hindu perspective. So and to see Hindus getting involved in that process of doing it is kind of weird, actually. Belief and practice. And belief and practice, I would actually, the primacy of practice is about experience. The payoff is experience. So our beliefs change all the time. We read another book and we go, oh, I never thought of that. Very good point, very good point. So, we're evolving in belief all the time. So it's not a very significant marker of who we are. But our practice is, and our experience is, because our experience is what really influences us in terms of the directions we go in life, the choices we make, the principles we follow, the people we take seriously. So if you go to a spiritual place, no matter what it is, and you have a bad experience, you possibly won't go back again. You possibly won't take up that practice. You possibly won't read their books. You'll look for something else. So experience is much more important than belief. So if I go and I sign up to somewhere and I believe in all their things, but I'm having a bad experience, I will move on. Because ultimately I want to be happy. I don't want to have a bad experience. And whether moving on means starting my own thing down the street or whatever. But experience is considered more important in spiritual terms. And that's always based on practice. You try a process, it works, it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you drop it. You try another one. And that just makes sense, rather than sticking with a process that doesn't work because you believe it to be true. So belief is weak in that sense. The knowledge is considered much more important than belief. And knowledge is informed as much by text as by experience.
Shaunaka, you mentioned about Anuradha visiting the Meenakshi temple. I wonder what the experience would have been if the Congress President, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, went to Meenakshi temple, because I'm sure she hasn't got a certificate. Would she be allowed in?
Well, the actual fact is that it very much depends on what day you go, what priest is on the door, and what side of bed he got out of in the morning. It really is as arbitrary as that. I mean, I've wandered into temples in India that people say you can't get into. And I've just kind of wandered in and kind of waved at the doorman and, chanted some mantra as I walked in or something like that. I don't know what convinced them, But, somehow you just get it. I walked into a temple in Chennai and as I was walking out, one of the guides said, "You're coming from inside? You're in the Garba?" And I said, yes. "Oh, Lord Shiva has been very merciful." And I said, "Why?" I said, "Oh, they don't allow white people." It wasn't even Hindus, it was white people. So like with Anuradha, the first day she went, said she wasn't a Hindu. The next day she went, the reason she wasn't getting in was because she was white. That's a different reason. So she was, what's that? Oh, she gave up in the end, yeah. Because the next day would have been a woman, and then, would have gone on. Next day, because she's too short, So you don't know what it is. It's arbitrary, it's arbitrary. So I was with a friend on pilgrimage in North India, and we went into, he had crutches, he'd broken his leg, and we were going into temples, no issue. We went into one temple, and a priest came up from the temple with a big stick and started beating him on the back. I was thinking, what's going on? And he says, "Out, out, out!" And he hunted him out because he had crutches. You take off your shoes, but you have to leave your crutches outside. I said, what's he going to crawl? Crawling is very good. For the murti, crawling in front of the murti, very humble. And he was serious. And it was just him. I know for a fact if I came an hour later and there was a different guy, he would have just waved him, no issue. So it's very arbitrary. And I guess if Sonia Gandhi turned up, some arrangement would be made, all of a sudden all the awkward guys wouldn't be on the door, and and donations would have been made.
Sorry?
A Bollywood actress went to a temple and she was treated like royalty.
I practiced what you would call Hinduism for probably 30 odd years. And I was talking to a very liberal Christian in some political sense that's very open and everything, and was trying to pin me down because I did some work as a Hindu practitioner with children, corporate, and asked questions, and she was insisting to pin me down had I got my certificate. And I started to go through a mental process to say, "Oh, well, I didn't take Guru Mantra from a Guru, went through the formal ceremony and the feet." And I said, "But hang on now, 10 years before that," and I said, "I can't really give that." She said, "It's too amorphous. What would I say?" And I said, "Well, just say it's too amorphous." But then I went through a process of trying to justify it to her, and I was trying to then think of where I got the certificates.
No, it's
the Hindu woman that was with me that said I knew a little more, and I said, "Well, I had to, because I came from obviously a different culture, so I had to read the book, look at the practices." And she said the same. She said, "Well, I can't really say it unless I was born Indian and therefore I'm Indian."
Yeah.
She said, "I'm not happy with saying that."
Yeah.
And neither of us could give this woman an answer.
Well, this has been the Indian way. There has been no church of Hinduism, so how could you give a certificate? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So, for instance, I have no certification of any kind, nor did I ask for any. I've had Nam initiation, I've had Diksha initiation. I don't have anything to say, like a membership card that I'm a Hindu. Nothing. And I don't expect anything. It's an arrangement that I made with my guru. We went through ceremonies, and it was a relatively private thing, just a small group of people, and that's all expected. You go into a temple, and there's a little thing going on in the corner, and there's some Diksha thing happening, and it's just a private thing with that family or that person or whatever's going on. And it's an arrangement, it's made with God. It's an arrangement made with God, and it's based on trust. And then you see by the person's practice if the contract holds.
You know, we need to be careful of not being sucked in like I was. Just for a couple of days, I saw on email, and then I did email, and said, "No, this isn't what you said," and I left it at that. In a nice way, in a nice discussion. But, I gone through a thought process for a couple of days, looking for GCSEs A levels to be and then on the other hand, South Indian priest in town, more than happy I had a discussion with him. I said, "Do you miss it?" He said, "Oh, no, it's all pretty." It went into a very philosophical, totally different view from very hooker sounding. The priest who you may expect would, give a list of, oh, this is what you must do to be a Hindu. But do you think we can get sucked into trying to just not justify, but fall into the looking for certificate?
Yeah, I think it would be very sad. I mean, I joined an ashram. I joined an ashram in Dublin, in Ireland, in 1979. Right? There were very few ashrams in Dublin and Ireland. There were 6 members of the ashram. A small affair. There was hardly a vegetarian in Dublin and Ireland in 1979. So I joined this ashram, and they allowed me to come and join the ashram. I wanted to become a Christian. That's why I joined the ashram. And these were the people who were actually practicing what I understood to be Christianity from my reading of the Bible. And they allowed me into their sangha. Now, if there was a test and an examination and all kinds of qualifications and all that kind of stuff, I would have been excluded because of basic incompatibility, because I wanted to be a Christian. What the hell are you doing here, And they even put a picture of Jesus on the altar for me, which was so kind. What a kind thing to do, just to encourage me, And that's how I got involved. And they just gave me shelter. It was like the Buddhist thing, refuge. Spiritual refuge. I needed refuge. I needed a place where I could go and think and sit with people who were practicing a spiritual tradition that I felt comfortable with, and just be around that. That's what I wanted. I just wanted that influence in my life, and they allowed it. Now, if it had become more stratified, more qualifications to get in and all that kind of stuff, and you got to sign up to this and sign up to that, I wouldn't have even thought of going there. I went in there because it was just an open door policy. They just recognized, they discerned, and it's a personal decision by a person in the temple. They discern, actually this one, he's not a drug crazed or alcoholic or, all the other things you get in Ireland on the street in those days. This one could be a bit more serious. Let's give him a break. And it's that mercy, that personal, interaction. And that's the relationship with the guru. And that's the relationship with God. It's a personal interaction. You're looking for a break.
I'm very hesitant to enter into this deep discussion of something that I know little about, but an occasion that I refer back to was when we visited a reconstruction of the Plymouth colony in Massachusetts, and a woman there simply said, "My husband is a good man." What is a good man? Is it a good man because he refers to some religious background, or is he a good man to his wife, to the community that he was living in? What is being good? And I've moved on from being a Christian choir boy through being a humanist. Am I a humanist now? Yes, I am. But when I talk to children, what I really am interested in is getting them interested in what being a human being is, as far as we know it now. And that is what I'm trying to do with the TEDx event that I'm putting on next year. How do we get people together so that they are able to converse, and they've got some background that enables them to converse intelligently? But to come back to, it's rather like Aristotle's virtues, but what is a good person? What is a good human being? And I'm very suspicious of labels of all kinds. They perform a function, but they don't perform it perfectly. And I think we've got to be very aware of sticking a label on someone and saying, because of that label and because of my understanding of that label, I know all about you.
Yeah, no, it's a very good comment. On the issue of being good, the discourse on being good in Hinduism is about Dharma. And that's not a religious discourse, actually. So even though Dharma is often translated as religion, you can be an atheist and be dharmic, and be very dharmic, be a very good person. That's not an issue in Eastern thought, what to speak of Hinduism. So it's a big issue in Christianity, and Islam, etc. You have to be a signed-up member of these traditions to be considered good in some way. But that's not the issue in Eastern thought. So everyone is expected to be dharmic. That's common sense. That's just how to live equitably on the planet, taking other people into account. Because Dharma is all about taking other people into account. Doing the right thing is about considering others. That's the essence of it. So that discourse is a very interesting discourse and very vibrant discourse, but it's not considered a spiritual discourse. And that spiritual discourse is not about being good or bad, interestingly. The Srimad Bhagavatam, for instance, among other texts, starts by saying this is a text for thoroughly honest men. Now, it means women as well, men in the bigger term. And what that means is people who are self-realized. So you begin the text by having attained Atma realization. And then you're qualified to read this text, because then it'll make sense to you. And if you read it in any other way, because it's not a dharmic text. And it's actually a text that often goes against Dharma in some strange way, for a higher cause. So what's higher than being good? And that becomes a very interesting discourse. And what are the exceptions? Because there's always issues about being good, in equality legislation. So the Christian couple run the B&B, and the gay couple come and they say, we don't want you. So then, which do you go against, with their religious right or their gender right, their sexual right? Which is one right over another right? It's kind of, how do you decide that? You can't leave it to the courts. The lawyers hate it when these things come to trial, because they have to become God. Where no one else in society can solve the problem, you're giving it to a lawyer, and he's kind of going, oh, no. And they can only work with the precedent of the law, which isn't a good instrument to decide on these things. It becomes very difficult for them. So this is a very important discourse in society. And the discourse has to go beyond just being good. And I would also suggest it has to go beyond being human, because our legal tradition in our society, in fact, our whole social structure is based since the time of the Enlightenment, so the 1700s, on the idea of human dignity. Now, it was previously based on the idea of the sacred, which was defined in Christian terms, but in more Enlightenment times, it's become based on human dignity. But the difficulty that Eastern traditions have with that is that it's speciesist. It's limiting. It's not, therefore, the policies you make are in favor of humans, and that excludes other beings. So the slaughter of animals was done with impunity. So you talk about cruelty to animals, but you don't include slaughterhouses. What's the thinking going on there? So so you expand the issue of cruelty, you expand the issue of violence by including all living beings. Humans aren't extra special; they're special because we're humans. But any person with life or anything with life is a person. Then your legal definitions become different, your social policy becomes different, your political approach becomes different. It means your environmental policy becomes different. How you think in terms of the whole planet is revolutionized. So the idea of, and this was a kind of pre-Enlightenment, a Renaissance idea of the humanist approach, which was all religious people developed these approaches, and all for good reasons, but I would just think that they're limited when it comes to, if you want a more global approach, you have to include the thinking of other people on the planet, and that includes more than just humans in terms of social policy. And I think that's where society has to go. Even in this country, we may say we're a Christian country, but are we? You know what I mean? And so what are we? And are we going to be global in real terms or just political economic terms? So are we going to include the thinking of other parts of the planet to make our policies in this country, to inform environmental policy, social policy, legal precedent? And these are issues of equality and rights. And so it's more than human rights, expanding those thoughts.
Would everybody join in? That was a beautiful lecture, Shaunaka ji. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Would everybody join me in giving him a hand?